Have you ever had somebody but actually you for having town guards in a fantasy world? You know the type. But actually, town guards are not historical. If you've had such a thing happen to you, boy, is this episode for you. Today, I am going to unpack city security, from external security to protect from attacks, to internal security to protect the citizens from ne'er-do-wells, thieves, and other shadowy forces. Welcome to Worldbuilding Blueprints, Season 2, Episode 7, City Security. Ever since the agricultural revolution and the concept of a true economic surplus, the need for security has been with us. As towns became larger and societies more complex, the role of security evolved beyond guarding the granaries to enforcing the law and ensuring the safety of citizens. Humans being what they are, we've evolved quite a few different models of security, and it's worth taking a walk through history and examining the various models of city security we've developed in different places and times. The earliest form of organized protection and law enforcement emerged in Mesopotamia and Egypt, where kings and nobles employed royal guards to protect their persons and property. These guards were often drawn from military ranks and equipped with swanky weapons to distinguish their elite status. In Egypt, during the Old Kingdom, private guards protected nobles and royal property, while the Middle Kingdom saw the emergence of the Magi, a professional warrior class tasked with guarding public spaces and enforcing order. The Magi were something like a paramilitary policing force, to put it in modern terms, organized under a centralized royal authority, which marked a shift from private protection of the monarch to a more formalized public role. Further east, in ancient China, they developed a sophisticated bureaucratic system of law enforcement through prefects appointed by the emperor. These prefects had limited authority and were responsible for civil administration and law enforcement within their prefectures. The system spread across Chinese dynasties and influenced neighboring cultures as well, and was a highly centralized bureaucratic system. Of course, we have to touch on the Romans because it is from their system that we get the first concept of an actual city watch or guard. See, I told you I'd show you how to shut down the "but actually." The Roman Empire's vigils, established by Augustus in 6 AD, represent the first known professionalized city guard, combining firefighting and law enforcement duties. Organized into 7 cohorts of 1,000 freedmen each, they patrolled Rome's 14 districts, extinguishing fires, apprehending criminals, and maintaining nighttime order. Their militarized structure, training, and equipment reflected Rome's urban challenges, including frequent fires and social unrest. They were probably the earliest recognizable police force in terms we would recognize. But the Western Roman Empire came crashing down, and what happened to policing then? In much of Western Europe, the highly urban, professionalized structures of Roman administration gave way to more localized systems of order. For example, in early medieval England, law enforcement operated through a decentralized framework that was rooted in communal obligation and mutual responsibility. One of the most distinctive features of this system was the hue and cry, and yes, that really was a thing. Under the Frank pledge system, households were grouped into units called tithings, typically consisting of roughly 10 adult males or 10 households. Each tithing was headed by a tithing man, and multiple tithings were organized into a larger unit known as a hundred, which fell under the authority of a royal official such as the shire reeve, which later became known as the sheriff. The hue and cry was triggered by the discovery of a crime. When a felony occurred, witnesses were required to raise an alarm, and all able-bodied men were legally obligated to pursue the suspect from village to village. Neighboring communities were required to continue the pursuit until the accused was captured or the trail was lost. Failure to respond to the hue and cry could result in fines. The Statute of Winchester in 1285 strengthened and formalized these obligations. It required communities to maintain watch and ward, keep weapons according to their wealth, and ensure roads were cleared to reduce ambushes. It also reinforced collective responsibility. If a known felon was not produced, or if a community failed to pursue properly, the whole 100 could be fined. This was less about punishing collectively and more about compelling cooperation in law enforcement. This system institutionalized that collective responsibility and self-policing. It relied on social cohesion, mutual surveillance, and shared liability rather than relying on professional officers. In towns, constables and night watchmen gradually took on more structured roles in organizing patrols, raising the hue and cry, and presenting suspects before local courts. So basically, under this system, you have a few professional law enforcement type people within a town, and then you have the bulk of the muscle provided by the common people organized into tithings. In the broader Europe, most medieval cities lacked formal police forces. Instead, they had volunteer militias, castle guards, and private levies to maintain order. In smaller villages and towns, for the most part, there was no material difference between the Lord's army and the city watch. Bear in mind that during this period, the Lord's fief was essentially their private property. The concept of a modern nation-state and people belonging to such an entity did not exist in a way that we understand it to exist today. However, in bigger towns and cities, there were urban watchmen who were distinct from the feudal levies and who provided especially internal security around the docks and warehouses of cities. Again, city watchers were definitely a thing. Don't let someone but actually you on that topic. And then there were the free cities, especially the city-states of Italy. These large urban centers were very different from their northern neighbors. By the 13th century, almost a millennia ago now, they developed professional police forces with officials commanding salaried troops to control both urban violence and noble feuds. Man, the Italian city-states is such an underused period of history to draw inspiration from. Florence, Naples, Milan, Venice, all of these cities in the Middle Ages, they make amazing settings for all kinds of stories. And that's without even adding magic. But let's shuffle eastward from Europe. In the Islamic world, urban order was maintained through a combination of administrative, moral, and intelligence institutions. The mutasib, appointed by the ruler, supervised markets, enforced commercial regulations, and upheld public morality under the framework of the Hisbah. They inspected weights and measures, regulated trade practices, and could intervene in cases of public misconduct. Alongside these officials operated the Barid, the state postal and intelligence network of the Umayyad and especially Abbasid caliphates. Hopefully I'm in the right ballpark with those pronunciations. While formally responsible for communication across the empire, the Barid also functioned as a surveillance and reporting system. Its agents gathered information on provincial governors, local unrest, and political developments, transmitting reports directly to the caliphal court. In this way, it acted as an early centralized intelligence apparatus, helping rulers monitor distant cities and maintain authority over vast territories. Gives a whole new meaning to the words going postal, huh? Anyway, over in Mughal India, Kotwals acted as local police chiefs responsible for urban law enforcement and order maintenance. They maintained public order, managed city gates, and oversaw market regulations. Overseeing economic activity is definitely a theme in policing in general and city security definitively. Anyway, the Kotwals interacted with judicial and military structures of the Mughals, an early form of integrating policing within hierarchical administrative systems. If we cross the Atlantic to the United States, there is a very interesting development of various police forces in the growth of that country. The history of law enforcement in the United States is deeply rooted in the country's colonial past, frontier expansion, and a shift from informal community-based systems to professionalized, centralized agency. In the early colonial period, law enforcement was largely communal, modeled after the English hue and cry system. Towns relied on constables, sheriffs, and volunteer militias to maintain orders, with sheriffs elected by local communities serving as the primary law enforcement officers. As the nation expanded westward, the concept of the wandering lawman emerged, particularly in the vast and often lawless territories of the American frontier. These figures, including the somewhat mythologized U.S. Marshals, Texas Rangers, and bounty hunters, were tasked with tracking down outlaws, enforcing federal laws, and bringing fugitives to justice across vast and sparsely populated regions. Unlike local sheriffs who were tied to specific counties or towns, wandering lawmen operated with broader jurisdiction and often worked independently or under federal authority. This duality between the rooted community-focused sheriff and the mobile, often federally empowered lawman became a defining feature of American law enforcement during the 19th century. Back in England, the 19th century saw the emergence of professional police forces, notably London's Metropolitan Police in 1829, which was established by Sir Robert Peel. Peel's principles emphasized crime prevention, public cooperation, and impartiality, which set the standard for modern policing because it was exported to English colonies almost wholesale, so it became the de facto model for a very large part of the world. You know, England's primary export is independence holidays for everybody else. Anyway. And since then, industrialization, urbanization, and political ideologies has shaped police roles, with authoritarian regimes often militarizing police forces and democratic regimes emphasizing community policing and accountability. And that's a very high-level speed run of the history of policing. Now, why did I take you on this long journey going all the way back to the Agricultural Revolution? Well, because if we look at the span of history, we can pick out a few clear models to use in fantasy world building. So let's talk about those models we can identify from history next. The first model is the elite guard, the private or aristocratic security. This is a security force funded, equipped, and often commanded by local elites, including nobles, merchants, or ruling classes. Their primary role is to protect the interests of their patrons, including property, trade routes, and political power. Historical examples of such a force include the Praetorian Guard from Rome, who were elite soldiers protecting the emperor and his family, private militias or liveried retainers of nobles in medieval Europe, or the Renaissance Italy's condottieri, who were mercenary troops hired by city-states like Florence or Venice. This kind of security force is identified by loyalty to a specific patron or family, not the broader community. They are often militarized and equipped with superior arms and armor. and sometimes they double as a status symbol for the elite. Our second model is communal policing or collective responsibility. For this model, security is a shared duty among community members, often organized through tithings, militias, or rotational watch systems. Only minimal leadership, for example, constables, sheriffs, or tithing men, are paid or formally appointed. Historical examples include the hue and cry system, where all able-bodied men are legally required to pursue criminals. And in medieval towns, the night watch systems, where citizens took turns patrolling streets. And even in the early American colonies, the militias and posses are an example of this kind of system. This kind of model is decentralized and reliant on social cohesion. It is low cost, but the effectiveness varies with community engagement, and because of this, it is often tied to legal obligations such as fines for failing to respond to the hue and cry. Our third model is the wandering lawman, the state or imperial representative. In this system, we have a mobile law enforcement agent sent by a distant central authority like a king, emperor, or federal government, to uphold laws, investigate crimes, or suppress rebellion in a remote or frontier region. Such a lawman often operates independently of local structures. Historical examples include imperial inspectors in ancient China sent to oversee the provincial governance, the U.S. Marshals, Texas Rangers, or even Pinkerton detectives during the frontier period, and district officers or political agents in British India or French Africa. In fantasy, we have great examples in the shape of Geralt of Rivia in The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski. In this model, authority derives from a central government, not local consensus. This kind of law enforcement often works well in areas with weak or corrupt local governance. And because it can clash with local elites or customary laws, it has a great deal of potential for drama if you're looking to write a law enforcement story. Our fourth model is professional municipal forces that do both internal policing and offer limited external defense. This is where a salaried full-time security force is employed by a city or state to maintain internal order, prevent crime, and sometimes defend against external threats, though they are not primarily a military unit. Often this combines firefighting, patrol, and investigative duties. Historical examples include the Vigils from ancient Rome, who were a night watch and firefighting unit. There are also the medieval Italian city-states we spoke about, and of course modern police forces. A great fantasy example comes from the city guard of Waterdeep from the D&D setting of the Forgotten Realms. In this kind of model, you have permanent, paid, and often uniformed forces who focus on crime prevention, public order, and emergency response. This kind of force may have limited military capabilities, for example, riot control, but they are not generally frontline defenders if there is an external threat. And then, of course, we do have a militarized city guards who play a dual role in internal defense and external defense. This is a hybrid force that serves as both a police force and a military unit, and they are responsible, as I said, for both those duties. Often this is seen in cities that are also fortresses or in regions with frequent conflict. Examples from history include the Ottoman Janissaries, which were an elite standing army loyal to the Sultan that fought in wars and often garrisoned cities, acting like an internal security. There was also the Byzantine Tagmata, which was professional imperial regiments that protected the emperor and the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantine. And in fantasy, we have the Gold Cloaks of King's Landing from A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This kind of force typically consists of heavily armed and trained soldiers for both policing and combat. They are often loyal to the city-state or the ruler rather than any concept of a broader nation, and they blur the line between soldier and police officer. And then we come to Model 6, which is mercenary or contract security, which is outsourced protection. Now, this looks somewhat like the elite protection in that they are often hired by the elite, but the difference is that your outsourced protection holds no actual loyalty to your elite. They are only loyal to their paycheck. So the security here is provided by paid outsiders, and this is often used when local forces are insufficient or distrusted. Historical examples include Greek mercenaries hired by Persian satraps or Egyptian pharaohs. In today's day and age, it even includes private military contractors like the Blackwater Group or the Wagner Group, or you could even look at gated communities that fall under this model with security guards paid for at the gates. Such a force is loyal only to the payer. They can be highly effective, but risky. History is littered with stories of mercenaries switching sides, after all. This kind of force is often used in times of crisis or in times of transition. And then we come to Model 7, which is the religious or ideological enforcers. These are security forces whose primary role is to enforce religious, ideological, or cultural norms, often alongside, or instead of, traditional law enforcement. These forces may operate as a parallel or a dominant system. The Hisbah from the medieval Islamic world is a good example of this, as is Puritan New England in America, where there were tithing men who enforced the Sabbath laws and moral codes. Under this model, authority is derived from religious or ideological doctrine. This kind of security can often be pretty controversial, with tensions between state law and moral enforcement. And then, of course, you can have a hybrid or layered system, which is what most of our modern-day systems have, with a combination of multiple of these models. Examples include medieval London, which had a combination of night watchmen, which were communal, sheriffs, which were local authorities, and royal sergeants, which were effectively wandering lawmen with authority from the central monarch. Or consider the Venetian Republic, which had a professional police force for the city, mercenary fleets for trade protection, and the Council of 10 for elite oversight. In fantasy, one of the best examples of this comes from Tamora Pierce's Becca Cooper trilogy, which I enormously enjoyed, which combines communal policing with an organized police force in the capital city of her kingdom. So, which of these models will you use, and how will you actually implement it? Well, I've got some questions you should ask yourself when creating your city's security force. But before we get into those, give me one moment to tell you how you can get even more out of this podcast. Members of the Just in Time Worldbuilding YouTube channel get free access to the worksheets on the topics we discuss in these podcasts. From the Build It in Straw tier to the Build It in Stone tier, not only do you get these worksheets, but you also get a monthly members live stream and early access to all my videos. But if you don't want to commit to monthly memberships, you can also purchase these worksheets on my Ko-fi page. And if you're interested in the first season's worksheets, buy the book Worldbuilding Blueprints Volume 1, which is an epic book with color layouts and worksheets that will guide you from zero to hero in world building. The digital format of the book is available on my website right now, and the physical will follow in February or March of 2026, depending on how fast the Kickstarter fulfillment completes. The first 15 people who use the code CITY2026 will get 30% off on purchasing an audiobook copy from my website, and then you can listen to my dulcet tones telling you all about world building. Links to all that down below. All right, now let's get into creating your city guard. Here are points for you to consider in your creation. Think about local versus centralized control. Policing has oscillated between local communal enforcement, for example, the hue and cry, and centralized professional forces, for example, the Roman vigils. This tension reflects political struggles over authority and governance, sometimes between the city and the larger kingdom, and sometimes between factions within a single city. Also think about militarization. From those Roman vigils to the colonial police forces, militarization has been a persistent trend with policing, often reflecting political instability or authoritarian rule. Then, related to that, think about the corruption and abuse of power. Historical and modern policing systems have grappled with corruption, from medieval constables accepting bribes to modern police misconduct influencing public trust and reform movements. How is this kind of corruption prevented? Are there inspectors, a council of oversight, internal tribunals, or simply no oversight at all? Also think about societal and technological change. Policing evolved in response to urbanization, industrialization, and technological advances, from the use of the horse and weapons to motorized patrols and digital surveillance. How do these kinds of changes impact the history of policing in your world, especially considering fantasy elements like magic or non-human races? Then think about jurisdiction and the law. Consider who can make arrests, how cases are tried, and who executes punishments. Are the city guards subject to civilian courts, military courts, or elite privilege? Consider your intelligence and information networks. Does the city use informers, spies, magical scrying, guild networks, or consensus systems? An often overlooked element is crisis protocol. What changes during an invasion, when there's a riot, when there's a plague, when there's a magical catastrophe? Who takes charge of the city? Don't forget about your fantasy elements. How does magic or fantasy creatures play into your city security? You also want to think about external security, as in the city is attacked by external forces, versus internal security, as in keeping goods safe, keeping the economics flowing, keeping citizens safe, and all of those kinds of protections. And bear in mind that your city governance model will come into play here. If your city is a free city or a city-state, it is responsible for both internal and external security. But if your city is part of a kingdom, it might only need to worry about internal security. If it's the seat of power for a ruler, it likely has additional security concerns that grow from the royal guard as well. And bear in mind that security isn't free. So how is all this paid for? How is it funded? And lastly, remember that history speed run that we did of policing in our world. How has your model evolved in your world? What model did you use at the outset of your city's lifetime? How has the addition of additional city cores, as we discussed in earlier episodes, influenced policing in your city? And what model does your city use now? And what vestiges remain of the old models? And that's my story on city security. Next time, we're going to kick off a big one: factions in a city. I'm pretty sure that'll have to be split up into multiple episodes, so make sure you're subscribed for that. A huge thank you to my channel members who make this possible, especially to the members of the Build It in Stone level, A. Wallyard, Epic, Jeff Hicks, Laura Bones 79, Necromancer JM, Neil Buckley, Katie Kofi Mug, and Tony Lamanna, as well as the members of the Build It in Wood tier, Husio, Patricio, Ignacio Roscovan, Mogzane, Jack, Mew 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 Mew, Nicholas, Aman, Bare Necessities, Carrie, Aya Shamimaru, and Tiffany Felix. Without your support, this channel wouldn't be possible. And I will see you soon for another episode of World Building Blueprints. Remember, build what you need when you need it.